Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name's Jed Lee, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the crowded mattress studios in the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville, in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted and so very honored that you'll join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcast. And please tell all of your family and friends about the show. Our guest today is Ali Condi. She is here to celebrate her debut children's picture book, Here. I mean, it's called Here. She's going to be here to celebrate Here. Before we invite Ali into the studio, we want to invite you to connect with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram, at Jedley Magic on Twitter. We're also active on LinkedIn. It's Jed Doherty on LinkedIn. And, of course, we would love for you to visit our website, readingwithyourkids.com. If you are a parent or an author, make sure you go to our blog and download the first ever edition of the Reading With Your Kids magazine. If you're a parent, also check out our Certified Great Read Wall of Fame. If you're an author, be sure to click the Authors Click Here button at the top of the page to find out how we can help you celebrate your book with the world. And, of course, you can use the contact button up at the top of the page to let us know what we're doing well, let us know what we could be doing better, and let us know who you would like to hear on a future episode of the podcast. And again, before we invite Ali into the podcast, we want to give a special shout-out. Happy birthday to Ali's daughter, Lainey. Happy birthday, Lainey. We hope you have a fantastic year ahead. Join us right now from Salt Lake City in the great state of Utah. Our guest is here today to celebrate her debut picture book. It's called Here. Please welcome to the show, Ali Condi. Hey, Ali, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me. This is very exciting.
I'm excited to have you on. I mentioned that this is your debut picture book, but it's not your debut book. You've authored young adult and middle grade novels. Tell us about this debut picture book, please.
Yeah, so it's not what I'm supposed to be writing. I mean, I do write for children, for young adults, and for middle grade students because I used to teach high school, and so that's an age I'm really drawn to. But then a couple of years ago, I had the idea for a picture book. It was just in the middle of the pandemic, and even my older kids, I have 4 children, were just a little bit really, like this is a tough time. We're all feeling a little anxious. So one of the things that we were doing was grounding ourselves in that 5-4-3-2-1 method that people talk about for anxiety, that psychologists or psychiatrists or therapists often use. And I thought, this is such a natural thing to do. This is like parenting small children, what you sort of do intuitively, where you're saying, hey, let's take a deep breath. Let's go outside. We know to do this, but sometimes we forget a little bit. And so that was kind of the impetus for writing the picture book, for trying something a little different. I thought, let's break this down to its most basic elemental form. And that's kind of what started me down that road.
Awesome. Yeah. It's interesting. I can't tell you how many guests have come on to say, well, I wrote this book during the pandemic. It was...
Yeah.
And I know books are being written all the time, but I wonder if 10 or 20 years from now we'll take a look back in history and think, what a gold mine that pandemic was. It was terrible for health and for everybody's mental health, but boy, it just was this, so many great creative things came out of that.
Yeah, I wonder. I think we were at home, so authors were at home like everyone else. We weren't traveling. So we weren't having that wonderful distraction. I love speaking to schools. And also, I think in a time of stress, you turn to your coping mechanisms. And for a lot of authors, that's our writing. So, yeah, that will be interesting to see.
Yeah. What was it like, and did you find it very challenging writing a picture book after writing novels for older kids?
Well, I'll be very honest with you. This wasn't my first attempt at a picture book. So I've been in this industry for a while, and I have an agent who is wonderful. She is brilliant. Her name's Jody Reamer, and she represents authors like John Green and a few other people who are quite well known. But she's very honest. And I had written picture books before, and she said, "Nope, we're not going to try to sell this. You go back to what you do. Go back to writing for older kids." So I sent her this one with a certain amount of trepidation, and she wrote back and said, "Let's do it. This is great. This is what I've been waiting for." And so that felt really affirming. The thing about picture books that's wonderful is they are spare. They're much fewer words. The thing about that's both wonderful and terrible is that every word counts. And so you are very careful. You want to make sure you're not being didactic or wasting your words on something that isn't for the kid. I do love a picture book that reads well for both children and adults, but that's not my concern in the initial telling. At least it's to make sure it's for the child, for the age group I'm writing for, that the words are chosen for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that we've talked about here in the podcast is that a picture book, one of the hardest things for authors is that they need to give the illustrators room to tell their part of the story. And as somebody who's been in control of your novels and writing your novels, was that hard to kind of go, "You mean someone else is going to help me tell the story?"
That was actually, I love where you're coming from with that, and I think that's definitely a possibility. But that was actually the most exciting part of the process to me. Was writing is a really lonely business, and I've been writing thousands of pages by myself. I mean, you're never totally on your own. You have your team, your editor, your publisher. But no, I mean, I've never had the chance to have original art done regarding my work, and that felt incredibly special and exciting. They did send me a few names of illustrators to look through, and right away I was blown away by Jamie Kim, is the illustrator who did this book, by her work. It's so lovely. It has this sort of fluid watercolor element in a lot of her pieces. And then this one, she sort of came up with a style I hadn't totally seen from her before. She just tailors it to the words and to the feeling of the book. So that was pretty exciting. And I'm also kind of lucky in that I grew up in a home with a mother who is a visual artist. So she has been an illustrator. And I knew from watching her work and from things that she said that the more you can let the illustrator have free reign, the better that is for the overall story and feel as well. So I was pretty excited to just turn it over. I gave very minimal notes. I think I might have made one note, like, it might be fun if this picture showed the child looking up close at something. And I was okay if she didn't take that note. She did, but yeah, I was pretty pleased to hand it over, frankly.
That's wonderful. I know, we having published over 1,700 episodes of the podcast. We've talked to lots of authors with lots of different perspectives and viewpoints. And I know for some authors, the idea that anybody is going to have any input into their book, whether it's an editor or a publisher, and there are some authors who've come on and like, this publisher thought that they would change the title of my book, and how dare they? And I go, well, you sold your book. It's kind of what happens.
Yeah. I mean, that said, you do have to trust the team, and I've been very lucky that I do trust everyone from the editor to the publicist, and obviously in this case, the illustrator was just supremely talented. So it helps to have a great team. But yeah, that was pretty easy for me to do, to give it up, so to speak.
Well, let's take a minute to talk about that, because we do have a lot of authors and aspiring authors on the podcast. And, in here you're talking to kids about how to kind of deal with their emotions and frustrations. And how can that author that I was talking about, who was insulted by the fact that somebody might want to make a suggestion as to a better title for their book, how can an author that, when they're unpublished, they're in control of everything, and it is their baby, so to speak, get to the point where they can develop that trust because I know I've worked with editors and, after it's gone to the editor and it's come back to me, I've looked at it and gone, I didn't write this. I don't know. But it was better than what I wrote. But I was like, but I didn't write this. I should might be on it. How can folks gain that kind of trust?
I think and first of all, I need to say that I do understand that. I mean, especially if you're at this point a new author, an unpublished author, you haven't had a chance. So why would you trust? You kind of have to trust the process with even more of a leap of faith. So I think that trust does have to be earned. I mean, when someone's acquiring your book, you want to have conversations like, what do you love about this? What would you like to address in changing? So when I have selected an editor, and I've been lucky enough to have a choice, I know that isn't always the case. I've always asked questions, and I've gone with the person who I felt like the questions they were asking were ones either I hadn't thought of but felt right for the story, or else the questions were so good that I thought, well, I wasn't thinking about that, but let's do that, and they felt true. So I think that's one of the things you have to do. If you really need to be at the helm of the book and you're trusting your intuition, like, nope, this is my project, I'm going to do this. I know you're very supportive of self-published authors, and I think that more and more is a way that is not as I don't want to use the term dangerous, but I guess I'm going to. For a while there were a lot of things being promised to people who published themselves that weren't given. And now with the advent of social media and things like that happening, that's become such a valid way to go. So I think that's a matter of trusting your intuition, trusting where you want this book to end up. Do you want the distribution that a large publisher can give you? If so, are you willing to make some changes with an editor that you are coming to trust? Or is it feeling like, no, I've got this. This is something that I can do on my own. For me, I love collaborating. And so that is part of the fun for me is working with the editor and the agent and seeing what they do with the book as well. But I know that's not for everyone. And I have absolutely no judgment on any of that. I feel like the whole point is to trust your intuition and your story because it's so personal.
We do love giving voice to all authors from all over the world, from different backgrounds, and we do love indie and self-published authors. And you're right, we are living in this amazing time where you don't necessarily need to take a second mortgage on your home, and although you certainly can do that, and you don't need to accept the shipment of 10 or 15,000 books.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what I was talking about. Like those kinds of things. I feel like there's so many more avenues now that are much safer. And again, I hate that I use the word dangerous. I don't want to scare people. And I think it's a very valid, beautiful way to go. And I love that you're so supportive of indie and self-published authors. That's huge. I feel like we don't need gatekeepers all the time. If you want to be your own gatekeeper, do that. So.
Yeah. And I mean, as a parent, my kids are adults now, but I felt very comfortable in the role of gatekeeper for my kids. And I know there's a lot of stuff that we did with our kids that people taking kids to funerals when they were young. It wasn't like crazy things, but there were a lot of things that we were criticized for. And my beautiful wife and I are very comfortable with the decisions we made for kids, and I think the parents should be allowed to do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sorry. I was more talking about gatekeepers as in publishers.
Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I think parents absolutely get to do that.
Yeah. So what is it about writing that drew you away from that always rewarding and a very financially rewarding career of being a teacher where everybody respects you and you get lots and lots of money and all this time off and you never have to work at home?
Oh, man. I think teaching is the greatest job in the world in so many ways. That said, it is not the job in the world that pays the best or is rewarded with the most respect and time. I did love it, though. And so the draw was actually I quit teaching to stay home with some cute little kids of mine, of my own. And one of them had a medical condition, he's fine now, that required that I not be out in the public schools bringing home every bug ever that might compromise. At that point was kind of a delicate situation. But I missed the students so much that I thought, okay, I'm going to have to find a way to do something else that kind of brings me closer to them. And I'd always loved writing. And so without even an expectation of it being published, I thought, I'm going to start writing some books for that age group, just a story or two, see if it has any legs, just to kind of keep myself in the mindset of teenagers, because I love all ages of kids. I have had all ages of kids at this point up to 21, so 0 to 21. And I felt like, man, teenagers are just interesting and exciting. And so are little kids. They're all in this, just everyone's bright and interesting and unusual and seeing the world in a fresh way. And I mean, you feel that too, obviously, with what you do, that there's something about working with kids that's special. And I think I was trying to replicate that a little bit at home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah. Going back to here, I love that we're in a time now where we're talking to we're letting kids and adults know that they can express emotions, experience emotions, that it's not a terrible thing, that we don't need to hide it. And I love the fact that in here you're letting kids know that there are a number of different ways that they can deal with their emotions, to be creative, to be kind to others. I think that's one of the kind of therapies that we don't talk enough about. The fact that when we're feeling down, frustrated, sad, sometimes one of the best things that we can do for ourselves is to do something for somebody else.
Yeah, and it's so hard to remember that when you're kind of in your scared, anxious animal brain. I mean, I understand why that's hard to remember. It's hard for me to remember sometimes, but it is the kind of the biggest thing is connecting and doing something kind for someone else connects you to that person. It connects you sort of to your best self. If you believe in a higher power or nature or, the universality of the human experience, it doesn't have to be a religious belief. You're connecting to that greater thing, that bigger part of who we are as humans. And I think that's so essential to us. So I think that's why it feels so good when it happens, is because we're wired for it. We're wired for connection. We're wired to do kind things for one another. And so that was fun to include, because I felt like that was, one, important, and two, something that I do see kids doing instinctually, and you probably have as well. Kids are pretty good, even though we sometimes think of them as being sort of insular or little and their brains are developing, but they often will reach out at really unexpected times to do really kind things. And that to me speaks to the innateness of that part of us as humans.
I have a story about that I want to share with you in a minute, but you mentioned higher power and religious. I had a really baffling conversation one time with a priest, my priest, someone that I respected a lot, and talking. I was doing a gospel-based magic show, and he told me that, and he told me that I was wrong to encourage kids to do nice things for others because it makes us feel good. And his whole thing was, you should be doing it anyways, just because God tells you to do it. And I'm like, but don't you think God tells us to do it because he knows it's going to make us feel better?
Yeah. And don't you think, I think we're given that from God or humanity or evolution or whatever people believe in. We're given that because it's a good way to live. It helps other people and it helps ourselves. So I love that you were telling kids that. I think that's great.
Absolutely. What the story I wanted to tell was really fun. I was at the school and in doing a show, and I mentioned something about standing up for others. And this little girl raised her hand in the middle of the show, which is very unusual. But I said, okay, what's your question? Stopping the show in the mid-tracks. But what is it? And she said, I just want to say, Jamie. And Jamie stood up on the other side of the room and goes, I didn't do anything to her. Leave it. No. And she said, no, you were really nice to me. Kids were hurting me, and you stood up for me. And, and he still didn't hear that. He's going, but I didn't do anything to her.
I know sometimes we're so surprised by kindness, aren't we? Like we're surprised when that kindness is acknowledged, because we assume I don't know. We assume that things are not going to go as well as we wish they would, and sometimes they actually do. So-
Yeah, yeah, and I'm really happy that I've lived almost 100 years, and
Stop.
I'm able to look back and see that that's true. That while I've certainly have experienced unpleasant interactions with people, most of the interactions I've had with people with the world have been absolutely wonderful. Even people who've been listening to the show know that I experienced a pretty serious accident that's laid me up a few months ago, and it hasn't been fun. But man, everybody that I've met in relation to this experience, from my beautiful wife down to aides and custodians in hospitals, they've been wonderful.
Wow. I'm glad that that's been your experience. I think it is for a lot of us, right? Like we're surprised by kindness, and really we shouldn't be as much as we are, because it's everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. I think part of maybe you can write a sequel to Here that's titled "Open Your Eyes, Will You Please?"
That would be a great one. There is actually a sequel coming. It's called There.
Okay.
We have the same illustrator, which I'm really excited about. But
Excellent.
yeah, speaking to that kind of idea of compassion, and that girl who'd had someone stand up for her, and then her literally standing up, I think that's really huge. And, we were talking earlier about gatekeepers. Like, parents have the right to choose things and help facilitate what's right for their kids. And then each parent has their own right for their own children. We've had all this trouble with book banning lately, and we don't have the right to choose that for other kids. We need to let, children decide what they want to read. And I kind of love the environment that you know about as someone who does a podcast, of all these beautiful people bringing their beautiful things to the table, and then we get to read all of it and be kind to one another. I kind of love that part of children's publishing when it works right. It's really fun to watch, really fun to see kids' eyes light up.
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing about book banning or banning anything, I studied. I've had some inspiration to do some very wise things that without the inspiration I never would have done on my own. But one of the things I did when my kids were in middle school was take a course on media literacy.
Oh, very interesting.
Yeah, and it was actually taught by a Catholic nun, and I was kind of hesitant because I thought I was going to go in there and don't let your kids read Harry Potter, and don't let your kids listen to that. And instead, she was like, don't even try banning anything, because it ain't going to work. They might not read it or hear it in your home, but they're going to read it somewhere else. So the best thing to do is to sit down with your kids and experience it and talk about it together.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then you have again, like we were talking about, a point of connection with your child instead of a wall being put up against them and against the people the book might be about.
Right.
But that's a really beautiful thing that you did with your kids. Yeah. That's a great idea.
Hey, you mentioned that you're a mom to a number of kids, and one is 21. Have you ever had, or did it take you a while to feel comfortable with your kids disagreeing with you?
Oh man, that is a tricky thing as a parent, right? I sort of expected it because I was kind of an argumentative child. So I felt like, well, that's going to be something that comes back to haunt me. Not that I was, I don't know, but my dad always tells stories about how stubborn I was, how I came by that honestly too. He was an attorney, and he said, and then of course I had a child who had to litigate everything. And that wasn't my intent. But I think kids do, it really is coming from a place with kids, as frustrating as it can totally be, where they just want to know, why? Because they haven't experienced that, and sometimes things don't make sense to them. And so they're going to double down on that. And so, no, it definitely can be frustrating, but I did sort of expect to be disagreed with.
Hey, I know that you are the author of, as we mentioned, books for kids in middle grade age and young adults. Our families, lots of our families have young kids, and they're reading picture books with their kids. I actually think Here is a really good book to read with your middle grade and high school kids because it's a great reminder of how they can deal with their emotions and the tough things that they might be experiencing. And I think middle grade and high school kids go through a lot more of that than even elementary school kids do. But I know a lot of the parents who are listening with young kids also have kids in middle school and high school. So what's a middle grade book from you that parents should check out, and what's a young adult title families want to check out too?
So my middle grade title that I'm probably the most proud of or pleased with is a novel called Summer Lost. And it's a very gentle, sweet friendship story with a little mystery at the heart of it, which I always loved reading as a middle grader. But it's about grief and loss in kind of a gentle way. And I think that kids go through that. Unfortunately, they don't emerge at age 18 with no grief and no loss. And so that was a really tender book to write. As is often the case with me, I write it for a lot of the times when I'm writing a book, I'm consciously or unconsciously thinking about a question that my kid has asked that I didn't know how to answer. And I don't know if that still happens in parenting, Jed, at this age, but that sure happens a lot with smaller children. Well, it's happening all the time. Mm-hmm. So Summer Lost for middle schoolers. And then I wrote a novel called Matched, and that's for young adults. It's been around for a little while, but that was on the New York Times list for about a year. And that's about a girl who lives in a futuristic society. And that was really fun to write because I got to invent a world, and really hard to write because I had to invent a world. But that was fun. I wrote that one with my former 9th graders in mind. And so I enjoyed the writing of that one very much.
Well, someday you're going to have to come back on and just talk. We've done a little bit of talking. I have a hard enough time when I'm reading fantasy and science fiction to keep all the laws of physics in that
Yes.
universe straight. And I don't know how you do it when you're creating it. And I don't know how, when you've created all these laws and everything that are happening in your galaxy, when you get to a point where it's like, oh no, it ain't going to work. Like, do you go back and change things? And like,
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
When you're writing it, you'll write yourself into a corner and you realize this doesn't make any sense at all. So you have to, there's a lot of revision, at least for me, when you're inventing a world.
hey, I know people are going to want to know where they can go to find out more about you and find out more about Here.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My name on there is Allie the Author. I don't seem to be on Twitter as much these days. I do also have a website, alliecondi.com, and I'm on Facebook. So any of those places are where I am.
We've had a great time speaking to the author of Here, a great picture book from our friend, Allie Condi. Hey, Allie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jed. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Mary Omeg. She'll be here to celebrate Boom Cards. Talk about a great, fun, interactive way to learn. You don't want to miss it. Want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Allie Condi. Please be sure to check out Here, wherever you find books. Also want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dieris, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.